This is the TSG Multimedia podcast for December of 2019. We're sponsored this month by Podomatic and the TSG Train Crew on Patreon. Thank you so much. I'm your host, John Abaticola, and I have some really great news. The YouTube channel went over 30,000 subscribers on November 29th. It's pretty amazing to think that that many people are interested, and I want to thank you, the best viewers on YouTube, for your continued support. I don't really believe in commercializing the holidays, but I do believe in celebrating this milestone on the channel, so I made an announcement this past Monday that everything in the TSG Multimedia website store is on sale for 30% off to celebrate 30,000 subscribers. Just enter the coupon code YouTube30K, all in lowercase, just like it looks like on the screen here, when you check out, and the discount will be applied. This code will expire on December 31st. It sounds like a long way off, but it'll be here before you know it. So get over to tsgmultimedia.com and get your order in while the deal is still on. TSG Train Crew members who support the channel directly on Patreon get access to previews, behind-the-scenes information, and a lot of exclusive content. I think model railroading is a very dynamic hobby that includes all kinds of facets, from design to woodworking to electronics, research, imagination, and a lot more. That's why I think it's important to make it as visible and accessible to as many people as possible. Viewer support is what keeps the content that promotes this hobby on the channel coming. So go over to patreon.com/TSG Multimedia and become a part of the TSG Train Crew. Every support level comes with some kind of reward, and every penny contributed goes toward the production of the content that you enjoy here on the YouTube channel. It's really easy, it doesn't cost much, and it helps everyone. If you can't afford to become a direct supporter on Patreon, please watch as often as you can and share the videos with anybody you know who might like it. It all helps, and it's all very much appreciated. So I mentioned last month that I was going to do a couple things in the last week of October that were happening after I recorded for the podcast. The first of those things was visiting a HO scale layout from a guy named David Griffy. That happened on the 30th. I know Griffy from Silicon Valley lines, and I recall for a while my friend Murph had a big HO scale ore dock in his layout room that he had been working on for Griffy's layout. Well, I saw that ore dock again, but this time it was installed on the layout. The layout depicts Southern Pacific operations with a strong emphasis on mining. This layout was designed for operations, and it has a lot of really cool technology incorporated in it. I hope someday we'll do a layout tour there. It would be a cool one. The next day was Halloween, and I went to Santa Cruz to help my friends at the Fern Creek and Western Garden Railroad put on their Halloween event. I shared a video of this event last year, and I was really amazed by how many people came to trick or treat. Well, this year was no different in that respect. The guys had some additional lighting and props, making the show even better, and a humongous crowd came, just like last time, with over 1,000 trick-or-treaters. The Fern Creek and Western usually has a few open to the public days each year, and the model railroad itself is worthy of a visit whether you're trick-or-treating or not. And I usually make an effort to post those things here on the podcast every month, whenever they're coming up. On Saturday, November 2nd, I went to the SBHRS Open House. This was one of 2 days that the Fall Open House took place this year at the SBHRS, and it was really cool because people that I know came from all over the place. Kevin Hill came out from Hollister, Trevor Park was out from Santa Cruz, Nick Wright came from San Bruno, Marty and Liam came from East Bay, and then Hunter and Gary came out from Sacramento. So there were a lot of friends that showed up to this, and I know that people come for other reasons too, but it was really great to get to hang out and see everybody there. A bunch of us went to have some lunch together, and when we came back, we hung out on the station platform and did some rail fanning. So that was a really great time had by all who showed up. We had our third TSG Live Crew Lounge stream on Sunday the 17th of November from the SBHRS. This was a discussion about model building approaches. You don't have to view live streams when they're being streamed, but if you do, it gives you the chance to ask questions in the live chat window. The panelists are experienced people with a lot of ideas, so it's likely you'll get some insight that you didn't have before you saw the show if you watch. Viewing the events live helps them become more visible on YouTube, so it helps the channel if you can be there. We're doing another one next weekend, and I'll fill you in a little bit more on the details later in the podcast for that one. On November 24th, we spent the afternoon with our friends Dave and Shirley Stanley. The main purpose of their visit was to record an interview with Dave for this podcast. So let's go to that now. All right, so I'm here with my friend Dave Stanley. You may have heard of Dave. He has the Marauder Belt Model Railroad out in Marauder, California, which you'll see here on the channel next weekend if you're watching for layout tours. You may have also seen it in RMC. It's been in RMC as well as some other magazines, right?
Yes.
So Dave's actually been a railroader. He's retired now, but has been a railroader for 40 some odd years. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and talk about the book that he co-authored here about the Central California Traction. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dave's career, about the book, stuff like that. And yeah, let's just jump right into this. So if you could, Dave, thanks for coming, by the way.
Thank you for having me, John.
That's the first thing.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the progression of railroading jobs that you worked and kind of how it all started?
Well, it started in 1974. I went from a job with Sears Roebuck in the credit department to student brakeman on Central California Traction. I was fortunate enough to call in sick at Sears the same day that the CCT was calling me to come take a physical. And if I had not called in sick, I don't know if I would have ever had that phone call.
That's funny. You were sick going to a physical.
Well, I was sick.
Oh, it was one of those. I get it.
So forgive me, everybody at Sears. Anyway, I took the physical, and in June 26, 1974, I became a brakeman on Central California Traction. And I worked for the CCT, which was kind of my neighborhood railroad. I grew up in Sacramento, and we lived about 150 feet from CCT's old main line into downtown Sacramento. So the highlight of the day for me as a kid was about 11 o'clock at night when the train had come by. Always wanted to go to work there, and I applied, of course, and then I got that phone call. So I worked for the traction company from June of 74 until I was furloughed in November of 1978. I didn't quit at that point, but I was furloughed, and a friend of mine that worked for Western Pacific said that they were hiring, and I should go talk to the train master at Stockton Yard. So I did that, and as soon as you tell them you have any railroad experience, and if they need brakemen, they'll pick you right up on the spot, which is what happened. So I worked for the WP. I was furloughed there about 2 months later when business slowed down, and CCT was calling me back to work at the same time. So I was double heading between these two railroads for about 4 months. And then in April of 79, I left the traction company for good, went back to the WP. In the middle of all that, 1977, for 2 months, I was again furloughed at CCT, and I went to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and worked for 2 months as a brakeman on the Oregon, California, and Eastern Railway, which was Weyerhaeuser's logging and lumber railroad out of Klamath Falls.
Uh-huh.
So that was a very memorable 2-month period of my railroad career. And then, of course, Union Pacific took over the WP in 1982. The recession was going strong at that point, so nobody was working. I had to work outside of the railroad industry for 2 years. In May of 1983, Union Pacific was calling brakemen that had been furloughed to see if we wanted to work in maintenance of way on a temporary basis till business picked back up. So I worked for 5 months on a rail gang in the Feather River Canyon, pounding spikes, pulling out old spikes and ties, and just a lot of fun stuff.
So that coincided with when UP took over the WP then?
Yeah, WP would not have offered that to the furloughed trainmen, but UP did. So we quite a few of us jumped on it. We weren't the best Gandy dancers out there, but I did learn how to swing a spike maul, so that was half the battle. And then in the summer of 1983, UP was raising the roadbed along the south end of Salt Lake, and they needed trainmen out there for the work trains. So a bunch of us packed up and drove out to Salt Lake, and I got to work the east end of the old WP at that point, now Union Pacific, on work trains for several months. And then a friend of mine at Stockton called and said, "Hey, we need yard masters. Come on back and we'll train you to be a yard master." So I went up to Stockton Tower and I worked as a yard master from October of 1983 until May of 1988, at which point word was out that they were going to start a series of locomotive engineer classes, and I had to basically re-exercise my seniority as a brakeman in order to get picked up for the engineer class. So November of 1988, I got picked up as an engineer, went into training for about I guess it was about an 8 or 9 month training course. And that's where I stayed until I retired in 2015 on Halloween night. So of course after 1996, the UP and the SP merged, and from that point on I probably worked more SP jobs and SP routes than I did WP.
What was your main gig, though?
I worked the extra board a lot, and then if I could hold the Dunsmuir pool, I liked running the Dunsmuir, or going down to Bakersfield from Roseville. And then my last year on the railroad, I bid in a local out of Stockton that ran over the SP from Stockton to Livingston and back. So I had a daylight job, weekends off, and after 41 years, I finally got a good run. So that's how the railroad works.
I was going to say, that's how it works.
That's how it works.
Talk about paying your dues, right?
Yeah. You don't have to answer the phone at that point, so it makes it kind of nice.
So it sounds like from the beginning, as a kid, you said that the highlight in your childhood was living next to the CCT track. So it sounds like you kind of wanted to be a railroader from the start. Did you know what it meant and what the hours were like and that kind of thing? Or was it just, it's trains?
Oh, it's trains. I had no clue. I had no clue that life as I knew it would end, at least for 41 years. But no, it was something I wanted to do. And of course, I had a Lionel set at first as a kid. And then I think I was about 8 or 9. My dad and his friend built an HO 4x8 layout for me and surprised me for that with that at I think it was Christmas. So yeah, I've always been into model railroading, and then of course, like everybody else, you go through your teen years and working for the railroad, and then finding out about girls and all that. You put all your train stuff away for a decade or a decade and a half.
Girls and cars, I think.
And cars, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For me, it was music.
Music.
Yeah. So I'm curious about this because you've written this amazing book. I mean, I looked through this book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet because it's so thick. It's something like 400 pages or damn near close to 400 pages. It's got hundreds of photos. I think it said 600 photos or something like that. More than 20 maps in the thing. It was originally pressed, in 2002, and then repressed in 2005, was it?
Yeah, 2002, the first printing came out. Signature Press was the printer. 2002, it was printed, the first copies in Hong Kong, in China. And then in 2005, the second printing was done here at Visalia, California, Jostens. And the Jostens version, which is what you see here, is superior.
I think Jostens did my high school yearbooks. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That name rings a bell.
And they do good work.
Yeah.
All the colors are richer, the black and whites are fuller. It's just a well done. And then we had a few corrections to make between the two editions as well. So.
One question comes to mind, especially when you see how thick and how substantial this book is. what made you decide to write a book? Because it's a tremendous amount of work, right? I mean, what made you decide you wanted to write a book about the CCT?
Well, of course, growing up along the track, I had very keen interest in that particular railroad. And the books I had in my collection at the time, all the other railroads that I was interested in were covered. SP, WP, Santa Fe, Sacramento Northern, nothing on Central California traction. And it was like God himself says, Dave, you need to write this book. So what happened in 1982, I think it was, 81, because my daughter was just about born at that point. I went to visit Wilbur Whitaker in Mill Valley. I'm sure many people know and remember Will.
Sure, also known as Will.
Yeah.
Even I know that.
And he's got photographs in about every railroad book out there. And Will brought out his files of Central California traction prints, and I thought, this guy can do his own book, a pictorial anyway, with what he had. So I bought quite a few prints from him and took them home and started mulling over the ideas and started finding out what information was available out there through historical societies. I was fortunate enough, having worked for CCT, even though I wasn't there anymore in the early 80s, that the management there I was good friends with, and they gave me access to all their back office files, which included authorizations for expenditures going back to like 1910. It was all there. What was missing was from 1905 to 1910. Everything else we had at our fingertips. I'd been working on it for a couple of years, and Jeff Moreau and I were old friends. Jeff's passed away, but I have a lot of good memories of Jeff. And he says, Dave, he says, how would you like a little help on that book as far as the research and whatnot? And Jeff had a very good background in electric railroading. He worked for the Pacific Electric, he worked for SF Muni, and he had a definite better understanding of electric railways than this diesel-oriented kid did. So Jeff came on board. We did some early research for those early years, 1905 to 1910, thereabouts, and making countless trips to Stockton and Lodi libraries, going through microfilm, and we went through historical societies, San Joaquin County, Sacramento County, really every outlet that was available to us to find information out about CCT's corporate history, and of course the history of all of its equipment. And Jeff had a very substantial photographic collection himself that he was willing to share for this project. So we collaborated on this and ended up with 410 pages, 626 photographs. There's 22 maps and drawings of equipment in the back of the book, full rosters, and a bibliography. And like I say, it was published first in 2002 and reprinted in 2005. We lost Jeff, I want to say about 2014, I think somewhere in there, he passed away. And but, without Jeff's help, the book would not be anything like it is here. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it, if no one has done a book on the CCT, it looks like no one needs to. I mean, that's how substantial this thing. I mean, this is it's like a textbook, and it's heavy like a textbook, and there's just everything you could possibly want to know seems to be in here already. So it's very well put together.
Our feeling was, let's get one book done and do it right. And if anybody wants to do a follow-up edition from 2003 on up till 2015 or beyond, then more power to them.
Yeah, because CCT is still running.
115 years now, I guess. Yeah.
Now, something that I remember hearing about, and I haven't had a chance, like I said before, I haven't had a chance to read the book just because of how thick it is and how busy I am, but didn't some other companies have something to do with it? Like it was a collaboration between SP and Santa Fe or something like that? What was that part of it?
Briefly, CCT's history, 1905, Howard Griffiths, H.H. Griffiths, as he was known, was the brainchild behind getting it started. And it was originally conceived as a second streetcar railway for the city of Stockton to compete with Southern Pacific's Stockton Electric. And by 1907, Griffiths had come to the point where he realized that he needed to expand this service. There was no money being made in Stockton. So they expanded service to Lodi. And at about that time, of course, the Fleischacker brothers got involved from San Francisco, Mortimer and Herbert Fleischacker. And Griffiths, in the meantime, was getting ill. He had cancer and was falling out of the picture. And the Fleischackers, by 1910, were majority owners of the railroad. Also that same year, the railroad was expanded to Sacramento, which was basically the zenith of its plans. They had talked about going to Modesto, which of course the Tidewater Southern later on did. And then there were other expansion plans, but nothing ever materialized. But they did have a 52-mile route from Stockton to Sacramento. And part of that is still being operated today from Stockton to Lodi. The Fleischackers owned the railroad until 1928, at which point Herbert Fleischacker sold it to Southern Pacific. And the WP and the Santa Fe both said, wait a minute, there's a monopoly going on here. And they went to the Interstate Commerce Commission and said, we want equal shares at this railroad. So after, I don't know, a year or so of deliberating, the ICC came back and split the railroad up equally 3 ways.
Okay, that's what I thought I remembered hearing
And then
about.
today, because of all the mergers, it's now owned 2/3 by Union Pacific and 1/3 by BNSF.
Oh, interesting. So that continues even now.
That continues, and that's why it still runs as an independent company.
Right? So here's the thing. Now, also, if I remember right, doesn't CCT also do most of the switching in the port of Stockton? Or is that something that...
All of the switching in the port.
Oh, so it's all of the switching. Yeah. For some reason, I thought Stockton Terminal and Eastern did some of that too.
No, they're over on the east side of Stockton.
Okay.
They handle industrial work on the east side. So the CCT handles the port of Stockton. They handle Rough and Ready Island, which is adjacent to the port. And then they still run the original main line from Stockton to Lodi. So they have about a 15-mile stretch of the original track that they still use. And over the years, the traffic base, which used to be originally was a farmer's railroad originally, a lot of agriculture, and then milk as well. Was picked up in express cars. And then over the years, that changed to canned goods and wine, lumber, and that has evolved now to today's California traction, at least in the Lodi area, where you have canned goods, you have plastics, and you have liquid sugar. No more wine is shipped out of Lodi on the rail. A lot of it's trucked out or piggybacked out.
Sure, because there's a lot of wine in that area.
There's a lot of wine there. Yeah.
Sure.
Unfortunately, none of it goes out in boxcar.
So there's one thing that I want to mention, and this is kind of an aside. We did your layout tour of your model railroad here a couple months ago. As time goes, like I said before, it'll be out next week here on the channel. And you told me when we were doing the layout tour, if I remember right, that you designed the red paint scheme that's on the CCT Jeeps. And I had a model of one, and I did it before I even met you. I did a product spotlight on this model from Atlas, and I was talking about how much I liked that paint scheme. I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind sharing it with the audience. How did it come to be that you were the one who ended up designing that paint scheme?
Well, Ken Tinker was the general manager of CCT in the 70s. In fact, he's the guy that hired me. And we had a really good relationship. Ken actually helped me quite a bit with the book.
Okay.
Some of the later chapters. But at the time, he was, when he first took over, CCT was being operating with second-hand Alco locomotives that were pretty much on their last legs, and a couple of leased SP engines. Ken knew I was into model trains and kind of a railroad historian. I don't like to use the word rail fan, but anyhow. Ken said, we're getting a couple of GP7s from Chrome Crankshaft, which was a used locomotive dealer. These were former Reading Railroad GP7s, running long head forward. And he says, I think you can come up with a paint scheme for me. He says, I want to stay with red and white. And he says, I'm going to put the quatrefoil emblem on the engine. And by the way, he was the gentleman that resurrected that emblem, which hadn't been used since the early 30s when the traction company was getting out of their passenger business. So I did paint some models at home. I took a couple different versions, and I came up with basically the version that you see here on this Atlas model. And he liked it. And I had no decals for the quatrefoil, so I took one of his business cards and cut out the CCT logo and glued it onto the side of the engine. But it worked. And he says, that's the way we'll do them. And they came one day, they were delivered, and they were gorgeous. They were painted in DuPont Imron red, and they looked like they'd been waxed 100 times. And I was real proud of that moment.
I mentioned it on the product spotlight that I did of this locomotive, that it's one of the sharpest looking paint schemes that I've come across. So I think you did a good job. If you don't mind me telling, all right, yeah. If you don't mind me telling you so. And one of the things I was joking with earlier off camera was that it was before I had met you, so you knew I wasn't trying to blow smoke on purpose. I actually liked the paint scheme. So back to the book. It seems like the definitive work on the subject. How do people get this book?
Well, here's the story. I'll capsulize it. Signature Press is taking it off the market after, 15 years. But they gave me the chance to buy as many copies as I wanted to. So I picked up quite a few copies. And I have them available basically at wholesale cost of $40 and $6 for shipping. So $46, you can get them directly through me. And my email would be rrfreak, that's RRFREEK, @gmail.com. And I accept PayPal, or if you want to send a check, you can email me and I'll give you a mailing address.
Okay, that works. Now, I don't recall, what was the retail on these things?
Yeah, these retailed at $65.
That's what I thought. I knew it was around $60 or $70.
And there's still some available in some of the bookstores and hobby shops at that price. So,
well, like I said before, this is a very thick, very substantial book. Lots of pictures. That's the part I like. I read books for the pictures,
Who doesn't?
That's my thing, yeah. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk.
Thank you, John, for having us.
Yeah, great having you over. Yeah. And eventually I'll read the book, and then I'll be calling you back to tell you how great it is.
Well, I hope I'm still alive.
By the time I read it, you might not be. By the time I end up reading it, I might not be. So, Dave Stanley, everybody. And now back to me in the studio. This is really a great time to snag a copy of Dave's book before it becomes prohibitively expensive on the used market. I have a copy, and I can tell you without any hesitation that it is jam-packed with information and photos documenting the history of this railroad, the CCT, that's been in continuous service for well over 100 years. Something else we talked about in the interview very briefly was Dave's Marauder Belt Railway HO scale layout. You'll get a chance to see that layout right here on the channel during next week's layout tour program. So I want to thank Dave and Shirley for the visit and let you know that Sydney and I both appreciate your friendship very much. It was great to hang out with you guys. On the 30th, we drove out to Napa to record for a layout tour of the Napa Valley Model Railroad Historical Society's HO scale layout. This organization has been around for decades. Their museum has been slated for closure by something called the Napa Valley Expo Board, which is basically their landlord. Get this. This Expo Board wants to demolish the buildings that the layouts are in to make space to expand a parking lot. So on the one hand, you have this great group of volunteers who serve the public and have been serving the public for decades by preserving history and giving people a place to learn about the area that they live in. And on the other hand, you have someone who wants to get rid of this valuable public resource to make a parking lot. To say it's unbelievable to me is a bit of an understatement. You can find out more about this yourself at nvmrc.org. I can tell you, after seeing their layout and talking to the half a dozen or so members who were there for the layout tour, it's well worth saving. Call me biased, but I can't even imagine wanting to destroy something that's a draw for the public with a decades-long history of its own for parking spaces that will sit empty most of the time. Regardless of how the story ends, we'll have the layout documented here on the channel for posterity. We have to go back to complete the video because while we were recording last weekend, there was a big storm that caused a loss of power in the building, and that cut our production short. So I will say this though, when we return to finish the production, we'll be parking in the mostly empty existing parking lot that they want to demolish the buildings to expand. It's outrageous. Anyway, I had a conversation with a viewer this past month who only watches this channel on his smart TV. He said there are no links below the video when you view the channel this way, and that you can't leave comments either. I realize not everyone views on a computer, so I'm adding the Teespring website URL as a graphic on the program right now. I mention Teespring every month because it's one more way that you can support the programs you like to watch here on the channel and also get some cool stuff while you're at it. There's a whole bunch of products you can use, from coffee mugs to t-shirts to phone cases and stickers, sweatshirts, tank tops, and just a lot more. There's all kinds of stuff on there. The website is teespring.com/stores/TSG-multimedia-swag. If you watch on a TV most of the time but also have a computer, you can watch the channel on the computer, and there are always very easy to follow links right down here below the viewing screen. All I'm saying is that's probably the easiest way to get to Teespring rather than trying to type in what I just dictated out on the screen here. December brings a lot of holiday-themed events in your local community, and it doesn't matter where you live. Here in the Bay Area, we have events at the Niles Canyon Railway, Billy Jones Wildcat Railroad in Los Gatos, the Holiday Lights Train in Santa Cruz by Roaring Camp. There's a toy drive put on by Caltrain, and probably some other similar events that I'm spacing on right now. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that you probably have a lot of similar things happening where you live. It's a great time to get out and support the organizations in your community that work hard to preserve local history. And these holiday events are quite often their biggest fundraisers. So get out there and do something festive that preserves local history this month. And now for this month's YouTube program schedule. Next Saturday, December 14th, I mentioned this a minute ago, it's the Marauder Belt Layout Tour with Dave Stanley. As you could tell from our interview, Dave's knowledge and experience runs deep, and his layout is a reflection of that too. You won't want to miss this one. On December 15th, it's the TSG Live Crew Lounge. That's at 4 p.m. Pacific Time. This month, we're trying something different, an open discussion format where the panelists bring their own topics to the table. I want to take a minute to comment about the Live Crew Lounge programs. It's a bit more formal than most of the live streams I see on YouTube and the ones that I've done in the past as well. So the level of interaction taking place live is a bit more controlled. And what I mean by that is, in the past, whenever I would do a live stream, I was on camera commenting directly and then in real time responding to comments that were being posted in the live chat window because I was monitoring that at the same time. We can't do that during the live Crew Lounge streams because the discussion has to stay as on topic as possible. So I've asked other people to help moderate the live chat window discussion. I want to thank those moderators directly here now. Many of these people are TSG Train Crew members, and they almost all have their own YouTube channels that I want to invite you and encourage you to check out. So thank you very much, guys. You know who you are. You do a great job, and I really appreciate your help. I'll also want to acknowledge the SBHRS here, because without the SBHRS and our friend Ed Thielen, who coordinates with me on the event calendar and who's always there to open the facility for our use, huge thanks to you as well, Ed. Your assistance is appreciated more than you know. On December 21st, it's our annual Steam Special, a look at the return of Sierra number 28, narrated by my friend Dave Connery, who is one of the most knowledgeable Sierra Railway historians I know. On December 28th, it's Model Railroading with Jack Burgess. In this episode, Jack shares his Yosemite Valley maintenance of way train. I can't really say much more than that since the program is still in pre-production, but I can say that it'll be an interesting show because Jack's scratch building is second to none. So those are all the scheduled programs. In addition to what I've mentioned here, I also have more products on deck for product spotlights and N-Scale Friday programs, as well as some unscheduled programs I'll be squeezing in on Wednesdays where I can. One of the product spotlights I have coming up is a cool little passenger train that Atlas released for kids. So that's something to look out for, maybe for Christmas, right? Before I go, I want to invite you once again to become a member of the TSG Train Crew on Patreon. The Patreon page helps me bring the high-quality content you enjoy to the channel. Once the support is high enough there, I want to turn off the ads on the YouTube channel. If you can help out with $2 a month or more, head over to patreon.com/TSG Multimedia and find out what kind of behind-the-scenes stuff the Train Crew enjoys. It's not really much, but if enough people do it, it'll add up, and we can get those pesky ads turned off. You are the best viewers on YouTube. I want to wish you all a great rest of the holiday season, a happy new year, and while I'm at it, thank you for all your continued support. I'll see you next time.